So, so Nora, I'll turn it over to you to just tell us how the job market looks and what Experis has going on in that regard.
Thanks, Bob. Can everybody hear me okay? I think I am on. Okay, so Experis, as Bob said, is a longtime partner for IIBA, and we are a local staffing organization. We're part of Manpower Group, so we have a lot of great opportunities, and we're hiring right now. We have great analysts that we work with that continually come to us for project and long-term assignments, as well as direct hire positions. So if you know anyone that's looking for work, or if you're interested in changing jobs, please feel free to reach out. In terms of the market, it's really, really hot in terms of candidates. I mean, it is a candidate market. So, we're seeing, for example, today we just had somebody interviewing and set up to interview, and he ended up getting another position offered and declined. And, it's just, there's multiple opportunities out there. So we work with a lot of great local clients here in the Sacramento region, really good at what we do. So we'd be happy to connect if anybody knows anyone looking, or if you know anyone that needs great business analysts, we have candidates as well. So I'll put my name in the chat and feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Thanks, Nora. And just one question from a COVID perspective. What's the vibe out there? What's changing? I know the mask mandate in some regards, has been eased. Are you seeing any changes in that, or are they still requiring people to be vaxxed and masked?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. And I think it's really a mixed group at this point. We are seeing some companies, smaller medical insurance based type firms that are asking for vaccination, whereas others do not require it. Manufacturing, production do not require it. It really just depends. And then we are still seeing a lot of remote roles. I know Experis is fully remote still and will continue to be remote. And then within the government, it's really still a mixed bag. Some are on site and some are remote. We support a lot of education institutions, and they're all back to school and back in session. So hopefully we'll stay that way.
Okay, great. Thank you. And at this point, I'll open up the floor. If anyone has any job announcements at your company that you'd want people to know about, just kind of speak up or put the information in the chat window, and that would be appreciated. Okay. So let's talk about some upcoming events. Originally for April 20th, we were going to have, an event just for the Sacramento chapter. We had the speaker lined up, and then the whole Western region, or actually just California, all the different California chapters, decided that April 20th, no connection to the 420 vibe, but April 20th was going to be a California-wide event. So Steve spoke with our speaker, and he's willing to flex on his month that he's going to present. So we're going to join the fray in this April 20th. It's called 5 Things You Didn't Know About Your IIBA membership. And it's not just for IIBA members, it's for people who kind of aren't really sure what it's about. You're not sure the value of it. And when you join, it's a 1-year thing. And when you pay the fee, part of this new, what they call member harmonization, some of that fee gets sent to the local user group chapters. So there'll be more coming out in that event. And I think it'll be really good. So it doesn't sound too good, but there's so much on the IIBA site. You would be amazed at the information that's out there. And then May 12th, there's this event. It's not run by us, but we're going to participate in it. It's called Interface. It's really a lot of IT security type things. It's free, and it's really, really good. They have different tracks and breakout sessions. It's all virtual. They have some great raffles, and you can make some good contacts. They even have like a coffee lounge thing where you can interact with some of the other members. So we'll be sending out some more information on that, but it's called Interface Sacramento. And then about a week after that, we're going to have our next meeting, and we're going to talk about how to elicitate and collaborate like a pro. Pamela Patterson is going to be giving that speech, and our theme, we're trying to theme our sessions a little along some of the BABOK topics, and we're trying to put a little bit of an agile spin on some of the things because agile is becoming so prevalent. So that's what you can look forward to going forward. The next thing I wanted to mention before we get into the main presentation is we do run, Sacramento Valley chapter does run a business analysis body of knowledge BABOK study group, and that particular book is the basis of IABA certification testing. So if you're not going to certification test, it's just a lot of great information anyway, but I would highly recommend thinking about getting certified. We had a couple of previous sessions where we talked about the values and benefits of that, and that presentation, it was last month in February, it's posted out on our website. So if anyone is interested in that, I put my email address the second time is correct with the CA, Blue Shield CA. I put it in the chat window. So definitely send me an email just so that I could kind of get you set up, because it's all about a week away, 8 days. And there's a little bit of prep work we need to do prior to, to getting that set up. It basically runs from 6 to 8:30 every Thursday. It's all virtual. There's 14 sessions, and the sessions, 2.5 hours, qualify for what they call professional development hours, PD hours. And if you make every session, you accumulate 35 hours, which is the minimum needed to apply to take the test. When you want to get certified, it's a two-step process. First, you have to apply to take the test, and then you schedule your test and actually take it. So you have to get through the first hurdle before you get to the second hurdle, but going through that study group will help you easily get over that first hurdle. So I know we got a lot planned, and Emily's probably chomping at the bit to tell us all her good stuff about BAPM. So we'll roll right into that next. So we're fortunate to have Emily Tom with us. She's from Ottawa. They're in a different time zone, and she's given this presentation before to some of the other chapters that are out there. Emily's an independent consultant. She's also the regional director of the IABA Northeast region. We have a whole Western region. We have regional directors too. So it's a whole big structure, where I think of them, the IABA, as the mothership, and we're kind of these little ships off in the distance, or colonies that, participate in the bigger picture. But Emily is taken on the role of regional director, which is a lot of extra work. These are not paid positions. You do it out of love for the sport. And she's passionate about business analysis and sharing her knowledge. Before everybody jumped on, we were talking about the time zone difference, and she's like, it's fine. I love sharing information. So Emily, thank you very much for volunteering to present. I'm going to turn it over to you, and if you want to do more introduction on yourself, that's fine. Otherwise, we'll get right into the material. Thank you all.
Thanks, Bob. Absolutely. I love being here. I love sharing with IABA chapters. We're all one big happy family, especially now with harmonization. We're now a global family. So I'm really happy to present some business analysis stuff. I'm going to be covering business analysis planning and monitoring, which is a whole knowledge area from the BABOK. Those of you who are going for certification, this will be very relevant to what you're studying for. But for those of you who aren't going for certification, it's still going to be relevant because it's something that I believe is helpful for us as BAs, just to make our jobs easier day to day. So with that, I'm going to share my presentation, my screen. Am I showing my PowerPoint deck?
Yes.
I will not go into presenter mode. All right, so you see it in presentation mode on cover slide?
Yes.
Yes.
Great, thanks for confirming.
Yes.
So today we're going to be covering business analysis, planning, and monitoring, and how it puts you in the driver's seat. Our agenda today, I want to talk about road trips because I like road trips, and I want to talk about some how business analysis and road trips relate to each other. And we'll talk about the realities of our business analysis work. I'm assuming that a good proportion of us here in this meeting do business analysis for a living or do it as part of our jobs, no matter which role we're in. So we'll talk about the realities of our work and how we face challenges, some ups and downs, some roadblocks even. And then I'll talk about this whole knowledge area from the BABOK called business analysis, planning and monitoring, which encompasses a whole set of tasks and activities we can do that will help us gain control over our business analysis work, basically put us in the driver's seat. And I'll share a couple of techniques that I like to use when doing this whole set of tasks. So about me, there's my picture, and I am a certified business analysis professional. And I can vouch for the value of getting certification. It is an uphill road, if you will, but it is certainly worth it. So please look into that study group that Sacramento Valley chapter is launching, and you'll find that you'll learn a few things along the way too. I am based in Ottawa, Canada, as Bob had mentioned. That's quite far up north. And you see here is a picture of what we call the Rideau Canal. So it's a canal that connects Ottawa and Kingston, Ontario. Kingston is where Pamela Patterson is located. This canal is 11 kilometers long, or about 6 miles long. And you can see here, there's a picture of the canal in the winter, and we can actually go skating on it. So it's pretty cool. I like road trips. I think I'd mentioned that before. I haven't done a whole lot of travel lately during the pandemic. Gas is very expensive, and plus we can't really go anywhere without all the hurdles of checking for vaccine passports and so on. So I'm pretty much homebound at this time, but I do like road trips, and whenever this pandemic is over, I hope to resume. Thank goodness for the GPS, right? I remember when my husband and I first started doing road trips. We were young and adventurous. In the mid 90s, we'd road trip all over the place. We would road trip out to Atlantic Canada. And there, I would primarily be the navigator. So back then we had the paper maps that was an art to fold up, and I would actually calculate the distances. So life is much easier now with the GPS, and it really helps us for when we hit roadblocks, right? So things happen when you're on road trips. Your car could break down, you might hit a pothole. In our case, one of our trips, we almost hit a deer when we were going out to Atlantic Canada. And we were young and stupid, so we were cheap also. So we were driving through this logging road across the province of New Brunswick at 6 o'clock in the evening, and we weren't paying attention to the fact that deer and moose could jump out in front of us. So ever since then, we had to make sure that we planned our trips so that we weren't driving in the dark when there were deer hazards. So these are the kinds of things that you have to consider when you're doing these long road trips. And I think there are parallels when we do business analysis. If we plan our business analysis work, then we can flex and we can adapt to whenever there's a roadblock. If, for example, your stakeholders change their priorities. If, for example, a stakeholder was missed or a requirement was wrong. These are things that we have to adapt to, but we can do this through business analysis planning and monitoring, which I consider to be our GPS. It helps us recalculate our route. So I'd like to hear from you. And we have a poll set up, which Steve is going to run in Menti, I believe. And I'd like to hear from you, the realities of your job. What are some things that work well or don't work well when you're doing business analysis? I think
I
this,
switched over. Can you see my screen now?
Yep.
Okay.
Is it a multiple choice?
It is, but you can pick more than
or-
one
Yeah. Or none.
or none.
So hopefully everyone's logged into the mentees poll.
Yeah, it's the same poll we were just in. So if you still have it on your phone, it should take you to the next question. Just check as many as you want and hit submit. There we go. Yay.
I like it when things go well on our job, right? And it's nice to see the distribution across. So there are, at least 6 things that we like about our job. It's interesting to see that stakeholder engagement is in the lead. And I think this is important because as BAs, we do our work for the stakeholders, right? Even if you think it's, oh, we're doing a technical upgrade because the software needs to be upgraded. At the end of the day, we're still doing it for the stakeholders. We're doing it to manage the company's risk. We're doing it to make sure that the technology is stable, the infrastructure is stable, so that the stakeholders can continue using the system. So it's all about the stakeholders. Okay, I think people are still voting.
Yeah, anytime you're ready, I can jump to the next question.
You get better at doing business analysis with experience. Okay, so I think that's also interesting. We learn from our experiences, and we don't necessarily put them on our resume, but we do our lessons learned and we apply them. And that should be music to Nora's ears, our recruiter.
Yes.
I think everyone has locked in their votes. Let's go to the next poll. When business analysis isn't going well, what have you observed? This is the doom and gloom, the dark side of our work. It's interesting that everyone is putting in their input. So we all have had challenges as we're doing business analysis. It's not all roses every day.
What did you mean, Emily, by just filling in the template? Was that?
That's the just fill in the requirements template. Don't put any thought into the work, just fill it out. We just need you to fill out the requirements without doing the analysis. Okay. Unclear expectations, lack of organization, can't meet stakeholders' expectations. Okay, so I think we all face challenges, and that's what we're here today to learn about some ways that we can do our planning so that we can face these challenges, resolve them, or even avoid them. Okay, I'm going to go back to the slide deck. Oops. Okay, I'm back on the PowerPoint, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so why do bad things happen when we're doing business analysis? I have my own thoughts, which I'll run through here, and I think some of this will resonate with people. So perhaps the goals of the initiative are not well understood, or there's no common understanding. Maybe the vision of why we're doing this thing isn't well understood or hasn't been communicated and confirmed that everyone believes the same thing. Have you ever noticed on a soccer field when you get the little kids, the 5-year-old kids on the soccer field, how they're all running towards the ball but they don't really play as a team to move the ball forward towards a goal. This is what I imagine some of our quote unquote teamwork looks like. We don't understand where the goal is and where we're moving. Perhaps the role of the business analyst isn't well defined. You show up on the team and some people on your team are doing the business analysis work that you should be doing, or perhaps you can bring value to the team, but it's not understood. Perhaps you're not given authority over your own deliverables. And if anyone wants to chime in or has any questions, I can certainly clarify this as well. Maybe there's some assumptions made about the stakeholders. We assume that we covered all the stakeholders, but we forgot about a certain group. Or maybe as BAs, we're not given access to the appropriate stakeholders. Maybe there's an unclear process for managing the requirements or changes in the requirements. Now, I realize with Agile, we welcome changes in the requirements, but perhaps we don't have an organized way to track them. Or perhaps we don't have clarity on who gets to provide input on these requirements. Here's one that I see quite a lot. And for me, it's very frustrating. It's almost disappointing for me, is that the team just dove right into the project work without planning it out. And therefore you had to backtrack and redo some of the work. Or maybe there was an unclear approach for managing the different project artifacts. So I realized that in an agile situation, the requirements are supposed to be light, and we're supposed to just keep moving on and just have enough information to be able to implement, and that we can tweak the solution with the product through demos of the product owner. But if you don't have a clear way of managing the different artifacts, how the requirements have changed, it's going to be hard for people who inherit the system after you leave. I'm thinking of people like the help desk or the system admin or the people who have to do the training, who have to deliver training. If we don't know how our materials are organized, it makes it very hard for those people to carry on. Does anyone have any questions? Or can people relate? I'm going to keep moving.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yes,
Yeah.
definitely.
Lessons learned. I find, like in my experience, I don't know if you've experienced this as well, but at the end of a sprint or at the end of a project, we do a lessons learned activity where we talk about, what could have gone better, what went well. We write them down in a spreadsheet, and then no one actually acts upon the lessons learned. So then the next time we do a project, we repeat the same mistakes. So that's unfortunate. And I find for me as a BA, it's very draining to see the repeated errors. So what can we do about this? BA planning and monitoring, of course. So I'll give you a second to read the cartoon. Yeah, I think that in our work, some of this is inevitable. Sometimes you feel like you're doing 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Hopefully it's not constantly like that. Hopefully you get to always move in a forward direction. But yes, some of this does happen. And I think there are certain things that we can do as BAs to manage this, to minimize the back and forth. So for those of you who are going for certification or who have picked up the BABOK and are looking at the BA planning and monitoring knowledge area, the first task of this is called planning the BA approach. And just a preface to all of this, a lot of the stuff that I'm talking about here, you're not going to be doing it in isolation. You need to be doing it with collaboration from your team or with your project manager, your sponsors, your stakeholders. The important thing is that together, or at least someone does all these activities, because it'll be so much more effective at helping the team move forward. So let's look at this first task that either the team with facilitation through the BA does, or the BA leads with input from the team. So planning the BA approach. What this means is that we're trying to answer these questions. We're figuring out what are the BA's roles and responsibilities in this engagement. What are the activities that you're going to do? What are the timing and sequence of the BA work? Definition of the BA deliverables. Because this is going to touch or address that unclear expectations challenge that we found in a poll. If we can clarify these things, the expectations will be clearer. Another thing that we have to figure out near the beginning is the techniques we plan to use. For example, one of the techniques that we use is workshops. We do requirements workshops, different kinds of workshops. And because workshops are quite involved and require participation of a larger group of people, you have to plan these things ahead of time, or at least put a pin in it and know that you're going to be doing workshops, so that the whole team is aware and that they can slate that in the calendar. And by doing all this will put you in the driver's seat. By asking these questions, or at least making sure the team has answers to these questions, it'll provide a lot more clarity and you'll be able to drive your own work. Any questions so far? Let's look at the next task, which is plan stakeholder engagement. So we saw that in our first poll question, we love it when our stakeholders are engaged. And when our stakeholders are engaged, these are the things that we're trying to figure out, right? We're trying to figure out who are the stakeholders who are impacted. What are their attitudes toward this change? I think we've seen situations where you get a handful of stakeholders who are resistant to the change. It just makes change management that much harder, right? You have to make them feel secure that they're not going to lose their job. You have to help them understand the value of this change and what benefits it'll bring to them. It's also important to understand the stakeholder roles. So this could be the end users, the consumers of the change. It could also be the roles on your project team. These are things that need to be ironed out at the beginning. What are the best collaboration methods? How do these stakeholders like you to talk to them? Do they like verbal communication? Do they prefer dashboards? Do they prefer really quick presentations? If you can understand their communication needs, it'll make things simpler. And then the last two, I think, go hand in hand. Understanding the different stakeholders' level of influence on the change, and then who's exactly the decision maker. So you don't want to be barking up the wrong tree looking for a decision when that person has no authority to make a decision. I think I've run into that problem a couple of times where I would ask for approval on requirements or deliverable, and it would take forever. Little did I know that I was supposed to go to someone else for approval. So we didn't need those unnecessary delays. These are the kinds of things that we need to think about when we're doing stakeholder engagement or planning the stakeholder engagement. Let's look at BA governance, planning BA governance. And I'll give you a second to read the cartoon. So BA governance, in my mind, it's not about creating bureaucracy. It's not about killing creativity or killing productivity. For me, BA governance is just helping everyone understand what are our rules and how is it going. By understanding our rules, it's going to help us move forward instead of doing those 2 steps forward, 1 step back movements. It's going to help us understand who's going to be making decisions about your work and the deliverables, who's approving the deliverables. what's the change management process or change request process? And how will the BA work be prioritized and who's involved? So this is about, it's almost like your charter. And I think it's important to understand these things up front, or at least if you don't know these things, if you have gaps, go and get those answers. And again, it's a collaborative affair where you have to get agreement with the team, but it is definitely important to understand how all these things are going to work so that you can keep making forward progress instead of hitting roadblocks and having to do some rework. So please jump in if you have any questions or comments. I'm going to keep moving.
I have a question, Emily. On your
Yeah,
last
go.
slide, you talk about understanding who your stakeholders are. What do you do if your stakeholders keep changing during your project?
Like the revolving door, you mean?
Right.
So if your stakeholders are not static, what I would do is understand who your stakeholders are right now and what their role is. What is their stake in your change? Like, why are they your stakeholders? Because if they vacate, someone else has to fill that position. So you're still going to have to figure out who's responsible for deciding on widget X. So it's important to map out your stakeholders and understand what is their role, what is their stake in a particular project. The other thing that I think is important is to write everything down. I know this, I don't want to create overhead, but I think this is one of those minimum things you do need to write down, because when stakeholders change, you need to have that audit trail about who said what, what did their predecessor decide and why. So it's really important to manage that and to document all these details. Does that answer the question?
It does, yeah, thank you. I mean, it's not
Okay.
just who the stakeholder is as the person, but the role that they held.
Yeah, yeah.
Helps to transition.
Yeah, who should we go to about a particular feature?
Right.
It's really, yeah, who cares? I don't mean to be, blunt about it, but who cares about a specific thing? Let's look at Plan BA information management. And I deliberately put a picture here of file folders. It really is important to organize the information. And I realize that people have systems like Jira or Microsoft DevOps. They have tools to store all this information. However, in my mind, these tools are great, but they're really blank slates, right? You have to configure them just right. They have to be configured so that they work for you and your project. So you need to figure out things like, how will requirements be traced? How do requirements relate to each other? What's the relationship between the different pieces of information? So for example, if you have user stories and then you have mock-ups and different models, how do all these different artifacts link to each other? It's important to figure out who all needs access to this information and what part of the information. So if you know who all your stakeholders are, because you did your plan stakeholder engagement, you will also be able to figure out the stakeholders' informational needs. And it's so important to figure out how you're going to manage information. And we know that data changes all the time, requirements change all the time. And that's why it's so important to have a plan on how you're going to manage the information. Because if you win the lottery, someone else needs to be able to figure this out, right? They need to be able to find stuff is really important. And I find too often project teams, they just get started. They're out of the gate. They've started doing the design work and the building and the testing, and they've gone to prod, but they haven't figured out how to organize the information. And not only is this important for things like the audit trail and helping the people who need to support the system know where to find stuff, I think it's also real important if you think about it. If you want to think about budgets and auditing of the project, if someone comes around and says, how did you build this particular piece of software? And what's all in it? And how, how much did it cost? Because if we're going to do this again, we need to know based on on a past example. So if you don't have this information organized, it's going to be hard to do this estimation. Any questions? Any questions about the bullets on the screen? Okay, I'm going to move on. Plan BA performance. I think for me, sometimes it's kind of hard to do this because you're basically evaluating your own performance. You're evaluating yourself. You have to accept your successes and your failures. So it's really about assessing how you did on a project. But I think it's really important to develop these KPIs and metrics because that's what makes us stronger. And it was nice to see in that mentee poll that when things go well, our BA work is getting easier and better. And I tend to ask, okay, so what do you mean by better? How do we measure better? These are some of the examples that we can look at for BA performance measures. So are the BA work products understandable by the intended audiences? Did you write a whole bunch of user stories that the developers could just pick up and go? Or did they have to come back and ask for clarification? Did you write information that was too complex and too cluttered for the stakeholders? So these are the things that you can think back and assess how you did on a project. You can also ask yourself, did you have the required skills and knowledge to perform the tasks on time? Or were you struggling? Was there a particular subject matter that you didn't know well enough, so you were really struggling to do the BA work? Now, of course, this tells you that you need to go get training or reach out to some mentors who can help you with these areas. What about the third bullet? Number of organization standards not followed. I think for me, this is a weird one. It can be good or bad. If the organization is not very effective at meeting their strategic goals, maybe there's something wrong with their organization standards. Or maybe they do have a set standard. Maybe they have some best practices on how to do business analysis. But did you go and color outside the lines? So these are things that you can go back and think, did I follow the BA standards? Or did I color outside the lines? And was that effective? The fourth bullet, of course, is very important. Were the business objectives met? Ultimately, you want to make sure that whatever product you go to production with meets business objectives. It's all good and well to deliver on time and on budget, but if it doesn't meet the business objectives, there's a gap in how you're doing business analysis. You can also look at things like the user adoption metrics. And this doesn't necessarily have to be related to an IT solution. Are the customers actually using the product? And there are different ways you can determine this, right? So you can do it through observation, you can do it through surveys, you can look at some of the usage data. So these are things that are important for you to look at as a BA to see if you were effective in doing business analysis. And the last one, and I'm not sure if you're familiar with this one, is seeing if your requirements are reusable. So have you written your requirements or your user stories or your artifacts in such a way that they could be reused for another phase or by another team? If they're reusable, then it means your BA work is good. It means that someone else can use them. So that's how I look at reusable requirements. And of course, this also helps with budgeting, right? If your requirements are reusable, it means the next time you do the project, it'll be that much faster. Any questions?
When you talk about,
Go ahead, Steve.
when you talk about meeting business objectives, are you talking about like the requirements for that project? or or more along the lines of like the organizational standards and objectives?
Yes, both, I mean, and this ties to that traceability thing. I think it's easier for us to determine whether or not our work met the objectives of that project because we have immediate visibility into that. But then, of course, hopefully you were brought in at the very beginning of the project to make sure that the project objectives were traceable back to the organization's objectives. So for example, let's say the organization wants to reduce the time on a specific administrative task by 5%. They want to, like, reduce expenses by 5%. And then your project could be to implement a solution that automates a set of admin tasks. So did your solution actually automate those tasks, thus leading to efficiency? And did that efficiency allow the company to reduce their expenses by 5%? So you should always have that traceability from the org level all the way down to the project level and then down to the actual product. So I think it's important to make sure that the business objectives are met, and it is in the BABOK. You might want to look at, I think it's chapter 2, talks about requirements classification. So if you do a search for requirements classification in the PDF copy, you'll see that it talks about the hierarchy of requirements. So it talks about business objectives, stakeholder requirements, the functional requirements, non-functional requirements, and transition requirements. All these things really are linked together. But ultimately, you as a BA are doing this for your stakeholders, and your stakeholders have business objectives. I hope that's not too scary, but you know what? We do a lot of work as BAs, right? We carry a lot of responsibility.
Emily, this is Bob. I was just going to add to that. When I think of measures, I tend to think of two types, quantitative and qualitative. And the quantitative are things that you could, actually like measure. They're hard measures. Qualitative gets more along lines of, like, is this understandable by the audience? Maybe you need to do a poll or have focus groups or whatever to figure it out. And I tend to associate the functional requirements with the qualitative, more of a qualitative measure, and the non-functional requirements more with the quantitative measure. So like, screen response time, or the way the screen tabs over, if it automatically tabs versus someone having to hit the tab key, those kinds of things. So that's just wanted to add those couple of thoughts in there and see what you think about that.
Yeah, so I think when you're talking about how the system performs, those are the non-functional requirements.
Yep.
Is the system up and running 99.8% of the time? Or how long does it take to go from one screen to the next? And then when you think of the qualitative measures, it's the user experience. How many clicks does it take for them to actually perform a specific task? If I'm booking an airline ticket, which I won't do for now, but if I were to do that, how long does it take? Or do I have to keep hitting the back button to get through stuff? Do I have to pull information from different screens? So you could measure these things quantitatively, but the qualitative things you would normally get from surveys and interviews and questionnaires. So for example, those net promoter score questionnaires, like how likely are you to recommend this product to a friend? Or how likely is a particular person likely to buy this product again? Or how likely are they to renew their subscription? These are the kinds of things that are qualitative. I think these are all part of user adoption metrics, and they're all really interesting questions to ask, and they do relate to our BA performance. Because if you don't have specific targets or standards, I think it does reflect on the BA performance. Did you understand the requirements well enough to help the designers and developers build a solution that people would like?
Yeah.
It's
And
there's a lot of work here, but it's good.
and another measure that I think sometimes gets lost in the sauce is the number of change requests that come in after requirements has been closed
Mhm.
and you're moving into future phases.
Yep.
So, you know, if the BA didn't do a good job, or there may be other reasons, but
Yep.
you know, there could be a flurry of change requests that kind of disrupts the whole apple cart.
The number of help desk calls.
After,
Right?
yeah, after it's been put in.
Right.
Mhm.
Right. So
So
these
would
are
you
all reflective of your work.
would you consider that, Bob, scope creep or missed requirements in the first place?
I think it's the responsibility of the BA to see themselves not as like a requirements taker, but you know, someone who has more responsibility than that in requirements. So if you don't think you're getting the right requirements, you know, or something sounds off, you have to be comfortable, and maybe not in front of everybody, but challenging that or following up on it.
Mhm.
Right. So I think a lot of the beginning BAs might just see themselves as just tell me what you want, I'll write it down, and then
We'll
you
follow
know
the
we'll move
template.
on. But you know, as you gain more experience and knowledge, and there's a lot of, like in the BABOK, one of the sections is what does it take, you know, what are the skills, the competencies of a good BA? So that's worth a look in and of itself to see like what are the things I need to know, you know, my business knowledge, my industry knowledge, my organizational knowledge, you know, and as you build all that and people start telling you what the requirements are, in your own mind, you might be able to go say to yourself, that really doesn't make sense. You know, I'm going to need to follow that up. And I think the biggest danger we have sometimes is we talk to a so-called SME and everybody believes everything that they say with, you know, without question. And some of the things just don't seem reasonable or rational afterwards, but who's going to challenge the SME? And, you know, it's about being able to challenge that, but, you know, not put that person on the defense. So I think
Yeah.
those are just key things.
Yeah. So it does take courage. I think for less experienced BAs, it's really helpful to find a mentor or go to your colleagues at your local chapter and see how they overcame certain challenges. So reach out to someone who is an experienced BA just to find out how they may have worked up the courage to challenge requirements. The other thing that I do if I want to challenge a requirement, I don't say that requirement's wrong or it doesn't seem right. What I like to do is help me understand this requirement, or if I understand this correctly. So I put it back on myself, you know, I'm sort of being self-deprecating, pretending I don't understand when I really do understand, but I believe it's wrong. So this is how I use the help me understand this correctly, or if I understand this correctly, then you'll get some more clarification from the stakeholder. The other thing that I found useful is, you know, you can be the requirement scribe, right? We can all do the scribing and write things verbatim. If you write things down and you write it in enough detail so they can understand, if you write it down and you write it down incorrectly, like, sorry, what I mean is, if you write it down and they read it and they don't like it, at least they read it, right? You have to come to them with something for them to give you feedback on. So that's how I try to do things. I write things down and then at least I have something to get feedback from the stakeholder. So instead of, you know, this requirement doesn't smell right, I'll actually write it down and say, so how does this work? and then they'll be able to explain. So it's and back to Steve's question about if there are change requests after you go live, is that a missed requirement or is it scope creep? I think it could be either. And I think one of the things that's challenging for us as BAs, and it's a really interesting part of the job, is to steer those, to manage the scope of the requirements. If a requirement was missed, then perhaps you didn't check in with a certain stakeholder. But if the scope is not the same scope as what your sponsor had expected, that's also about stakeholder management. So I think it's really interesting as BAs, we should be in control of all of this. It's kind of like our GPS, right? It needs to help us get to a destination. It needs to help us recalculate when we go off on a different route. Or if you're using something like Waze, right? It'll help you figure out where all the traffic is and to help you go to a different path. So that's where I think a BA plays a really important role as the navigator in the delivery of a product. Any questions? Is your
I had
mind
a question,
blown?
Emily.
Yes. Hi, Michelle.
Hi. Yeah, so everything you're saying is, I totally agree with. I do feel like I'm a new BA as far as following the BABOK. I just recently got my ECAB.
Oh, congratulations.
And I found in a project that I thought it was scope creep, but I guess really looking at lessons learned, if you don't ask the right questions and maybe you don't understand the process, really well yourself, then the business will only answer what you ask them,
Exactly.
and then you document that. And then later on when they see it, they go, wait.
Yeah, that's not what I wanted.
Yeah. So I think it's really more the inputs, outputs, really understanding what are they trying to use, when it comes to this specific requirement. And then also the traceability, kind of, documenting it and seeing how it actually goes together.
Yes.
And then when you see them together, you go, oh, wait, there's a gap.
Mhm.
And I'm noticing that. And I'm a new BA. So I'm actually I'm doing this thing this year where I'm saying, if I was the BA of my department, BA manager of my department, which we only have 2 BAs, but what standards would I want to implement? What's the processes that, I'd like to do? And I'm presenting them to my manager. So this information is really helpful because then I'm going, oh, let's think about this, almost like creating a procedures, manual for a BA.
Your standard operating procedures.
Yeah, just so that way we can understand. And then we have, the list of requirements or techniques, and we have the list of documents and artifacts, and we have templates that we could use. But I also think a list of questions that we can ask or consider asking, so we can dive deeper if needed. But I did have a question about the number of reusable requirements logged. So can you give me an example of a reusable requirement?
Let's say a requirement is
I can give an example if you want.
The first name field must be alphabetical and it must accommodate 25 characters. If you wrote that clearly enough, it could be used on every other screen and every other product. Or let's say the password, the login requirements. If you write it in such a way that it's standard, it can be reused over and over again. And I think Bob had
yeah, I was just gonna use another example too. Where I work, we go through what's called a product cycle. So every year we release new products at Blue Shield of California. And, from year to year, as you gain more experience, it's basically the same thing. Like if we introduce a new product or if we add a feature to a product, etc. So, there's typically a similar set of steps that you go through every cycle when you have to, say, for example, add new products. You need to file with regulators, you need to put it in rate sheets. And so like Emily was saying, is if we write our requirements well enough, if we had new products that we added last year and we're gonna add them this year, we just start out with that great, probably like 80 or 90% filled out sheet of what people gave us last year. And we just start with that. You know, we don't have a blank slate to all our stakeholders and say, tell me what you need to do. And you know, a lot of times the stakeholders do stay there for a little while. So they appreciate that because they get tired of telling us the same thing, even though it's a year later.
Yeah, weren't you
Over and
listening?
over.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's a great example. And you know, you're being more efficient that way. It's giving your stakeholders something to actually look at. And it's good to write them down because, you know, conditions change over time, right? So you'll have a set of artifacts that you can look at and see what is our as is. But just a word of caution from Michelle in terms of creating a standard list of questions and a standard operating procedure is also build in some flexibility because, you know, I'm not an agilist. I'm not an agile purist, but I know that if you go into an environment that works in an agile fashion, the manifesto says that they welcome changes and requirements. But I think what they really mean is they welcome changes and requirements up to a certain point where you do your code freeze and you're ready to go to production. And the reason why you welcome changes and requirements is because you're sitting with the stakeholder and you're getting their feedback on a particular product. And maybe the way you wrote the requirements originally isn't exactly what they wanted. So you have to show them
Yeah.
the evolution, like you're tweaking it, right? It's kind of, I think some of you are in VSP, which is a vision care provider, I think,
Yep.
eyeglasses. So, you know, when you go to the optometrist and they stick that thing on your eyes and they go, number one better, number two better, number one better, number two better. Then they switch the dials again. It's the same kind of thing when you're a BA, right? So do you like the validation question on this screen to be here, or do you want the business rule to happen later on? So you're always tweaking to get it just right. Now, please write down what just right is so that you have your artifacts. Put that in your information management system. So I think a BA is really important to help us navigate and to fine tune our requirements. But of course, you have to go live with something so you have your working product because you don't want to just keep doing analysis paralysis. So what's good enough? What will they be happy with? Keep the door open to allow the next release of the product to have more changes, but they still have to have a working product as they're doing their agile sprints.
Yeah. Thanks.
And I realize, Michelle, that this is a lot of information. And this is the stuff that have accumulated over, you know, close to 14, 15 years of business analysis work. Do things in baby steps and learn from your experiences. Come to your chapter events so you can also learn from your peers and how people do business analysis outside of your company as well.
Thank you.
And what's next? Some of my favorite techniques, because I've just been talking about theory and not really telling you how. One of the techniques that I like to use quite often, and it's also in the BABOK, is the functional decomposition. It's big words. All this means is, as a BA, what are the tasks you do and what are all the subtasks that you do? So requirements elicitation is a task we do. We elicit requirements from the stakeholders. So what's a subtask to that? Well, we write down those requirements and then we refine those requirements. And then we validate the requirements back with the stakeholder. Is the way I wrote it, is this correct? So you have your tasks and your subtasks. So if you write down the things you do and the subtasks, it's really going to help you plan your work. It's going to help you do your estimation and your scheduling. And it's also going to help you understand that if the stakeholder changes something on you, they do some scope changes on you, how does that impact all your other work? So it's really, I find functional decomposition is a useful technique to use. Another technique, it's also in the BABOK, is the stakeholder onion diagram. And it sounds kind of weird, but what this is it's a hierarchy of stakeholders in relation to your project. So, you have your project team, you have your core group of people who are responsible for delivering the project. Your project manager, the BA, the developers, the QA people, the trainers perhaps. And then the next layer up above this are the people who are impacted or who are going to receive your product. So it could be the end users, it could be the trainers, it could be the help desk people and the system admins. So they're not directly involved in your project, but they are on the receiving end of your project. And then above that, you could have your company stakeholders, the senior management. They care about reports. They care about whether this product is delivering return on investment. And then above that, you could have another layer who are the external stakeholders. For example, there could be some regulators, the legislative people, or they care that whatever you're doing is compliant with the law. So the nice thing about the stakeholder onion diagram is it's really quite simple to use. And all it is you're just listing out who are all the stakeholders, the roles, and in relation to your project. Are they closer to your project, or are they farther out from your project, but they're still a stakeholder? And I think the beauty of this diagram is it just helps you understand who are your stakeholders so that you don't forget somebody. And I've seen too often, especially with software implementations, is that you have the project team who puts out the solution. They do a lot of communications to the end users, some change management for the end users, but then they forgot the help desk people. So the help desk people turn around, they're really angry because they weren't taught on how the new product is going to work and how they're supposed to support this thing. Or the system admins weren't made aware. The people who are responsible for doing the upgrades, they weren't told. So the stakeholder onion diagram hopefully will help you map out who are the stakeholders who all have a stake in this particular product. And there's also the RACI chart. This stands for responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed. So if you have a project or an engagement, you can have a list of deliverables. So for example, the user stories, or the designs, or the build, or the test plan. So you have all these deliverables, and then you're putting it in a matrix. Who's responsible for all those different deliverables? Who's accountable for each of them? Who's consulted? So who are the stakeholders that you need to tap into to get information to produce that deliverable? And who's informed? Who needs to be kept in the loop on all these different things? So of course, the RACI chart it's a classic project management tool, but I think it is a valuable technique to help us keep track of things and who cares about what. And we've mentioned lessons learned. Understanding what could we do better on this project, or what went well on this project. I want to take this a step farther and ask, this solution, is it meeting the business objectives? What are some lessons learned? What can we do as BAs to help our products satisfy the business objectives better? So it's not just about the project lessons learned, but the product as well. And the last one here I put is root cause analysis. And for me, it relates to how we do our work as BAs. Did I forget a stakeholder? Or did I miss a whole set of requirements? So that's why I go back and ask myself, what was the root cause of that mistake I made? So these are some techniques that I think are really useful, and some of them are actually quite simple to do. So I think you can go ahead and try these out, map them out even in a hypothetical situation, and you'll definitely learn from this. Any questions? And I think I'm coming near the end, so I'm going to give you some final thoughts. Business analysis, planning, and monitoring is a knowledge area in the BABOK. It happens to be the first one in the book, but I want to make sure that you understand that it's also a continuous set of tasks. We should be doing this to help us remain in the driver's seat of our BA work. You know, they just put it at the beginning of the book because it's a linear book that has a page 1 to page 500. But we should be using business analysis, planning, and monitoring throughout a whole engagement. If you're doing this, it's going to put you in control of things, but it's also going to help build trust with your team. It shows that you're being mindful about how you plan your work and that you have the goals, the team's goals at interest in interest as well. In lessons learned, sometimes you can also ask hypothetical questions, you know, what if questions. What if we did that technique, or what if we did something differently? How would things go differently? Take small baby steps so you can see the results. If you are working on a big project and you think there are lots of things you could have done better, just do one thing at a time so you can see that you've actually improved. Because if you try and tackle many improvements at the same time, it's really hard to see if your improvements actually result in benefits. And finally, please don't perform these tasks like a recipe. Don't fill out the template. I hope that you'll do these tasks and understand that by doing these tasks, it's really going to put you in the driver's seat. It's not about filling a template and saying, yep, I've done it. It's about doing it and making use of the results. And so that brings us to poll question 3. And I pass it over to Steve.
All right, it should be coming up here. Hopefully you all still have the Menti page still open on your phone.
And if you see a technique that's not here, feel free to put in the chat something else you'll try. That's great. I think some of these techniques are pretty straightforward, and they can go a long way to helping us do our business analysis. And I see lesson learned is in the lead, lessons learned on our BA work. So if you failed at something, don't be so hard on yourself. It just means that you can improve. It's an area for improvement. You can get better. And then you just reuse those skills project after project. Root cause analysis, I think that relates to lessons learned as well. Great. I'm glad that people are going to go ahead and do these things tomorrow. And I do see a comment in the chat from Suzanne. So this is such an important topic. A BA's familiarity with the business domain or industry or the application, if there's one already, can really determine how adept one is at guiding the scope that Emily mentioned. This is just my take on my work at SAP for the county. Of course. Yeah, so one of those competencies that Bob mentioned, there's a whole chapter on underlying competencies that a BA needs to have in order to be successful, is having that industry knowledge or having access to someone with that industry knowledge. It'll just make you sound more educated when you're working on that scope, right? And you know, be the inquisitive BA. Ask them to help me understand the scope, help me understand the process or the business. You can start by looking at processes. You can start by looking at the user base. You can start by looking at any business rules, anything that governs how this product is supposed to work. Awesome. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen back if Steve has ended the poll. Okay, questions and answers. Did anyone have any other questions? Thoughts? Does anyone think that this business analysis planning and monitoring thing is really big and onerous to do?
Emily, this is Bob. Just to share a few thoughts here. I think it's great that you said that business analysis planning and monitoring is continuous, right? And I know you might have mentioned this, but it's worth saying again that the BABOK is not a step-by-step cookbook or guide for how you need to do things. Or it is a guide, but it's not a methodology, right? So the BABOK just gives you best practices in certain things. And for business analysis planning and monitoring, it's something that we tend to do up front, and then we kind of maybe lose a little bit of it, and then maybe look at it again when we're in trouble or we need to do things. But the point I wanted to make too is that even though you might be stuck in a waterfall project, there's certain things you can still do in an agile way, right? And the planning and monitoring is one of them. So you could, just keep refreshing your plans and your monitoring of how things are going. Lessons learned is also a really important thing to treat more like agile. I think a lot of people tend to wait until everything's over and then they have a big lessons learned thing and people forgot what, some important things. But it's something that you could take off the page of in a waterfall project and treat more in an agile way. So those are just a couple of things. And, my last thought for this knowledge area is basically, and there's more to it, a lot more, but there's that saying, plan your work, then work your plan. I think some people come up short sometimes on the planning side because there's so much pressure to get started. But I think taking that time up front to do this kind of planning is going to pay off huge in the end.
Yeah, it saves you a lot of rework. It shows that you're putting some thought into this work, so you gain credibility. And let's reiterate, business analysis planning and monitoring is a knowledge area in the book. Happens to be the first one, but don't treat this as the first thing you should do. You should be doing it constantly. The way that I look at the BABOK, or the way that I interpret it, is the book is a reference book. So if I need to do something in my business analysis work, I'll go to the specific chapter in the book that pertains to whatever I'm trying to do. It could be chapter 1, it could be chapter 5. So it all depends, but the book is there to help guide us. And I know the book is really dry and theoretical, and that's why I also find coming out to chapter events, listening to some of the IIBA webinars, it's so helpful because it helps us condition our brains to start thinking automatically these things that we can do as BAs. But you can do it. It's continuous, but you can do it. I'm convinced. Any other questions or thoughts? Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to present to your chapter. I wish I could be there in person. Maybe one day I'll get out to Sacramento. But thank you so much for the participation, the engagement, the questions. I appreciate that.
Great, we'd love to have you out here, but you can't skate in our canal. Be frozen.
If you guys have time, I can tell you about the story I got lost in San Francisco. I don't know if there's a rivalry between San Francisco and Sacramento, but I can tell you a
San
story.
Francisco is a dangerous place sometimes. Okay.
So if you want to run your questionnaire, your polls, the
well,
fun stuff,
I just
the
have,
draws.
we've been trying to do this knowledge quick hit. So I just have something really quick to share. And the slides will be, Steve is going to post the slide deck, the recording, and my presentation slide deck will be posted out to our website. But in conjunction with this knowledge area, I put together a slide deck to talk on root cause analysis. So let me just call that up and do my share. Hang on.
When you're done with that, Bob, we have a quick raffle and then a quick quiz. Both
Okay.
have prizes, so stick around.
Everyone
So
needs
quick
stick
seems to
around.
be the operative word here. This is a quick hit, knowledge quick hit, root cause analysis. So, you know, I think a lot of people have heard it, but this is just going to define it a little more formally for you. So, you know, what I think of root cause analysis as is, let's get to the bottom of this, right? This graphic here. But it is a process for identifying really the, excuse me, the underlying thing that's causing a variation in performance. And it says beneath every problem, there lies a cause. When you're trying to solve the problem, you need to first identify it and then find ways to eliminate the causes and prevent them from reoccurring too. It's not just about solving the problem, it's understanding why it happened and to see if there could be other areas that might creep in or other things to cause more problems. Okay, so the next thing here is, this is just saying basically a root cause analysis. The problem presents itself and, you know, there's a visible problem and a symptom. And you know, that may not lead you directly to the root cause. There could be a first level cause, then there could be a higher level cause. So you got to keep digging until you get down to the root cause. Because if you can't get there and solve the problem there, then, you know, you're just kind of putting a Band-Aid on it, or putting your finger in the hole in the, you know, the dam, and, you know, that's not going to work long term. So, and it's also saying that some problems aren't easily solved. They're not just one thing, they could be many things. And it's the evil at the bottom that has this cause and effect thing going on. All right. The next slide just says, as you're trying to solve the problem, you have to remember that if you only remove the symptoms or those first level things, the problem could actually become worse because now you're masking that root problem. So it could just become really big. And when it finally presents itself again, now it's unmanageable. So that's that slide. And then this slide is just giving you some, you know, framework to do things. And a lot of this is intuitive, but it's just nice to see it all presented easily for us with pictures. So first you want to define the event, then you want to find the causes, then you want to keep digging until you get the root cause. And then you want to have a solution, make a recommendation, and then you want to employ that solution. And then you need to still monitor and assess, just in case you didn't find the root cause. You can't assume that if something went away, it won't come back again because maybe you just solved it. You didn't solve it at deep enough a level. And then this, you know, I'm not going to read all this. This will just be in the presentation, but this takes those 6 steps and gives you a little bit more detail on the steps and basically about how long, you know, time-wise overall, it'll take you to get through those steps. So the first 2 steps are important, right? To find the event, find the causes. So one thing you could do there is this fishbone diagram. So you brainstorm causes and you map them into a fishbone diagram, and it's just a way of getting things out all together and visual. And it may lead to other thoughts that you didn't even think of when you start putting these together. And then there's the thing called the 5 whys. I mean, people have probably heard this before. And if you have anyone who had young children at one point knows what this is, you know, when a child starts asking you about things and you say, well, this is why it is. And the child says, why? And then you have to go deeper and deeper and finally get to the point where you don't have any more answers. You can't answer. And that's when you've sort of reached the bottom of, you know, where you need to be. So the 5 whys is just a good technique to keep going with someone to really kind of drill down and get to the bottom of what's going on. This other example is just saying that, you know, when you get some of the data, you could present it in a way that makes it easier to kind of assess and analyze. So in this example, it was a cat commercial where, you know, the production delays were occurring and they were trying to figure out why they couldn't herd up the cats to get them to work correctly. So, you know, they did some observations and attributed causes to that, and then totaled it up, and then they mapped it into this Pareto chart. And really, this kind of makes it stand out that really what was causing the cat's disruption was the smell of previous cats, so, or other cats. So you can kind of, you know, maybe attack the most important things, and it's really not that it's too cold or they're hungry or whatever, based on this little example. And then the rest of this is just the other steps and some of the variables associated with those. And that's it. You know, I'd love to have a discussion about this, but we're already a little bit over. So the other thing I want to mention is that, trying to plug the Babcock study group again, but if you join the Babcock study group, we do dive a little deeper into root cause analysis. It's one of the 50 techniques, but you'll also get a copy of this guide. It's an ASQ guide that is about 119 pages and has a wealth of information about root cause analysis, some of what we just covered. All right, I'll turn it back over to you, Steve, and stop sharing.
Thanks, Bob. And ASQ, that's the Six Sigma group, right?
Yeah, it's the American
Okay.
Society for Quality.
Okay. So we're going to do a quick raffle prize. First, I'm going to stop recording because the rest we don't need to record. So let's